Ever wonder why you can't book a direct flight between India and China? I mean, we're talking about the two most populous nations on the planet. You'd think there'd be flights, right? Well, let's get into it because the answer, it's a lot more complicated than you'd probably guess. It all really starts with a single number, 1,995.
Yep, that's how many days it's been, as of right now, without a single direct passenger flight between India and China. Think about that. We're talking about a combined population of almost 3 billion people. That's a third of all humanity, just completely disconnected by air.
And to put that into perspective, China has direct flights to places like Afghanistan, Taiwan, even North Korea, but not India. I mean, that degree of isolation between two massive global powers is just, well, it's pretty much unheard of in the 21st century.
So, the big question is, how did we even get here? This isn't just some short-term blip. We're talking about a half-decade of total silence in the skies between them.
The very last flight was China Eastern 564, heading from New Delhi to Shanghai way back on March 20th, 2020. But here's the crazy part. Just a few months before that, in December 2019, there were 539 flights in that 1 month alone. It was a huge, bustling, and super profitable route. Then, nothing.
Okay, so you're probably thinking, well, the pandemic, obviously. And yeah, you're right, that's exactly how it started. Back in March 2020, both countries slammed their borders shut. But here's the thing. India reopened its borders 2 years later, in March 2022, and China followed a year after that. So those pandemic restrictions, they've been gone for a while now.
Which brings us to the real mystery, doesn't it? If the pandemic is over, why are the planes still not flying? The answer has nothing to do with public health. It's all about something that happened on the ground, in one of the most remote and hostile places on the entire planet.
The real reason is a deadly border clash, a clash that completely poisoned the relationship between the two countries. So on June 15th, 2020, just a couple of months after that last flight landed, a really brutal confrontation broke out in a place called the Galwan Valley. Now, because of an old agreement from 1996, no guns were fired. Instead, soldiers fought with rocks, sticks, and homemade clubs. It was the first deadly encounter in 45 years. Dozens of soldiers were killed, and it just shattered decades of what was, a very uneasy peace. But here's the thing. This one incident didn't just happen out of nowhere. It was more like a violent eruption of a conflict that's been simmering for decades over the world's longest and most contested border. See, the border is really split into 3 key sections. Over in the east, China has historical claims to an area it calls South Tibet. Then you've got the middle section, which is dangerously close to India's Chicken's Neck. That's this tiny, super vulnerable strip of land that connects all of northeast India to the rest of the country. And then, in the west, you have Aksai Chin. That's where the big clash happened. It's a desolate plateau, but it's absolutely vital for China because it connects 2 of its most restless provinces, Xinjiang and Tibet. And here's the root of the whole problem. There's no actual agreed-upon border. There's just this thing called the Line of Actual Control, or the LAC. And really, it's not a line at all. It's more like a vaguely defined zone. Both countries have their own idea of where the line is, which means you have these big overlapping areas that both sides patrol. It's a recipe for disaster, basically guaranteeing confrontations. So, as you can imagine, the fallout from that 2020 clash was swift and it was severe. It basically plunged the entire relationship into a deep freeze, and honestly, it still hasn't thawed out. For India, that clash was the last straw. It triggered a wave of retaliation. We all heard about banning apps like TikTok and blocking Huawei from their networks, but they went further. They basically choked off all person-to-person contact. Visas for Chinese nationals slashed. And maybe the most telling move of all, they stopped renewing journalist visas for both sides. Today, there are 0 Indian journalists in China and 0 Chinese journalists in India, a total information blackout. And all of this leads to the diplomatic standoff we're in right now. It's pretty simple, actually. China is saying, let's get the flights going again, let's normalize things, and then we can talk about the border. But India's position is the complete opposite. They're saying, nope. We talk about the border first. For India, normalizing the relationship is their leverage, and they're not willing to just pretend everything's okay while there are still major tensions at the border. But wait, there's another layer to this whole thing, a really important one. It's a quiet shift in economic power that's changing the game for both countries.
For decades, right, the story was all about China's unstoppable growth. But that's changing. Lately, its economy has really started to slow down, and you can see it right in their travel numbers. International flights are way down compared to before the pandemic. China's economic engine, for the first time in a long time, is starting to sputter.
Now, contrast that with this number. $500. While China's aviation world is slowing down, India's is just exploding. An Indian airline recently placed an order for 500 new Airbus planes. That is the single largest purchase in the history of commercial aviation. So you see the point here, right? While China's momentum is slowing, India's is just getting started. It's taking off.
So, where does all this leave us? Well, with a very unresolved and, frankly, a deeply uncertain future. Here's the bottom line. Beijing is now feeling a real urgency to patch things up, to stabilize relations, and get its economy humming again. But New Delhi? They feel their own economic power growing, and they're in absolutely no hurry to give anything away. And that difference, that fundamental gap in urgency and momentum, that's why the planes are still sitting on the tarmac.
And that leaves us with one last, pretty unsettling question. Because even if flights started up again tomorrow, the real problem, the border, is still there. The old agreements are in tatters, and both sides are building up their military forces. So you have to ask yourself, what, if anything, is going to stop the next deadly encounter?